This is a very, very special car that's come to us from Jaguar Daimler Heritage Trust. This is the number 2 silk cut Jaguar XJR9 that won the 24 Hours of Le Mans in 1988. It was driven by Jan Lammers, Johnny Dumfries and Andy Wallace, and Andy's here this weekend with us. And this car was the start of something really, really special for Jaguar. They'd returned to Le Mans after 31 years, after winning with the C and D types in the 1950s. In 1987, they nearly had their year, and I think they were quite surprised about how competitive the car had been. It is. And I've just been tapped on the shoulder by Andy Wallace. And of course, in 1988, they returned with a new man at the wheel, actually, of that car. Let's talk to the driver from 1988, and we had a fantastic evening on Friday night, Andy, where you shared some of your stories of that amazing race. But let's just sort of go through that in brief, really. You started in single-seaters. By 1987, you'd started to have conversations with TWR, mainly because you'd bumped into Jan Lammers in F3, hadn't you?
Yeah, well, before I answer that question, I have to say I'm very impressed with all the homework you did before we did Friday's event. You really know your stuff, so fantastic job.
Thank you, Andy.
But yeah, back to Macau. Yes, we did bump into each other. It was last lap of the first heat, and we were having a good old race, and Jan has the best car control of anybody I've ever met, but even he managed to semi-lose the car into the Lisboa corner, and we came together, bang, bang, bang. I passed him, we both stayed on the road, and after that we were friends.
Well, I mention that because that great friendship was part of the success of this car in 1988, and he really helped you. You were a guy who'd come from single-seaters. This was a new discipline to you. It really helped you along, didn't he?
Yeah, I mean, the difference between a Formula 3 car, which goes 160 miles an hour at Macau and a bit less than everywhere else, to a car that does well over 200 miles an hour, is a big jump. And yeah, he was sort of my guide, really. I mean, there's lots of things about endurance racing that it's not obvious, certainly if you're a single-seater driver. And he was always, okay, you've got to do this, don't do that, be careful of this, and you'll be all right. And everything he told me, in fact, I used for my whole sports car career, I used to remember, Jan said this, and it turned out true every time.
Well, of course, 1988 was your year, and there must have been a lot of pressure from the outset at Le Mans that year to deliver a result, because TWR had been trying for it. It was their year, wasn't it? Did you feel the pressure at the time?
Definitely felt the pressure, and also being the younger team member, Jan and Johnny were the guys who were racing the whole year in that car, and so I was the one coming in to help, but I could also help by crashing it into the wall, or not help as it was. So I very much felt that, yeah, there was a lot of pressure on me. I didn't want to let them down, and that's in fact why in the end I said, guys, can you just tell me what I'm supposed to do? Of course I knew how to drive a race car, but Le Mans is something very, very special. And it's not every day you do Le Mans, and it certainly isn't every day you win it.
Absolutely. Well, the speeds you were putting on Mulsanne Straight in 1988 were just incredible. So much so, in fact, that you were actually starting to worry about whether the tyres could take it, weren't you?
Yeah, what's odd is that most racetracks, if you're on the throttle for between 5 and 10 seconds, you've got to the end of any straight. But at Le Mans, it just goes on and on and on. So your brain starts to think of things like, what's that noise? And, there's a vibration that wasn't there before. All these kind of things come into your head. That's if you're on your own. Of course, if you're with other cars and you're passing other cars, you're a bit preoccupied. But if you're just on your own going down the straight. And tyres were an issue at Le Mans, and in fact that's why the chicanes ended up being put in. And the radial tyres were right on the ragged edge of exploding on the straight. So we actually went back to the cross-ply for this race. But you still weren't guaranteed that the tyre wasn't going to go down. And if you got a slow puncture, there were no pressure sensors in those days. So a slow puncture would, in fact, end up as a tyre failure about 3/4 of the way down the straight. So, yeah, you've got plenty of time to think about that. And there's lots of trees and lots of things to hit. So, yes.
Well, we'll talk to Tony Southgate in just a moment, the man, of course, responsible for designing this car. But what was it like to drive? Was it an easy car to get to grips with, or was it hard to handle at the time?
It's an absolutely fantastic car. Well, first of all, it's iconic, the design, isn't it? And to be able to be part of the TWR Jaguar team, slot into the car already is fantastic. You press the start button, fantastic V12 sound, and then of course you can see it's a full ground effect car, so the amount of grip you had, particularly in the higher speed corners, the faster you went, the more grip you could generate, and it really was amazing. Somewhere like the Porsche curves, for example, where you've got 5 corners one after the other, all in 4th or 5th gear, tremendous amounts of grip. It was fantastic.
Superb. Well, it was a really tough engine, and we'll speak to Alan Scott in just a minute about how tough that engine was. But the gearboxes did struggle to hang on to things, didn't they, during that race? Tell us about how it nearly didn't happen in 1988.
Well, at those years in the 80s, the gearboxes asked to do an awful lot of work, and the engines were getting more and more powerful. And of course, it's almost impossible for a gearbox to stay together. So, as a driver in those days, you're still shifting with an H-pattern gearbox, whereas now it's all done pneumatically, and you don't damage the gearbox very much. The driver could very much decide whether the gearbox was going to break or not.
Yeah.
So between the three of us, we had to be very careful, and we tried to eliminate one or two of the shifts per lap to try and get to the end. But yes, one of our other cars broke down in the middle of the night, and the symptom was, I think they went into third gear, and there wasn't a gear there, went into fourth gear, and then there wasn't a gear there either, and then it retired.
Right.
So Jan had a similar thing very close to the end of the race, where he went into third, and it wasn't there. He went into fourth, found fourth, and thought, that's it, I'm not going to leave fourth gear for the rest of the race, and it got to the end somehow.
Well, it's a testament just to the power and especially the torque that you have in that car to be able to finish a whole lap, an whole race in one gear, and quite a high one at that, isn't it, really? I mean, Mulsanne corner, for example, was usually a first or second gear corner, but to take that in fourth must have been quite hair-raising.
Well, you're absolutely right, because most racing engines have got a very small power band, a lot of power, but you've got to keep it in that band. Well, this, I mean, literally from idle, it'll tear tree stumps out of the ground, and that's the beauty of it. And of course, it was based on a production Jaguar engine, and absolutely fantastic piece of engineering.
Superb. Well, obviously you've had a great career after 1988. You were there in 1990, of course, for the next great victory of Jaguar and TWR. Obviously you went on to race in LMP2 and more modern prototype cars. You've been right at the cutting edge ever since, but do you still look back on this? Is it just an old nail, or does it still hold a special place in your past?
No, to be honest, I've got to drive the car, I don't know, probably 10, 15 times since then, at regular intervals, and every time you open the door, jump into the seat, which still fits, luckily, don't get too much weight on, and shut the door down, it's fantastic. Press the start button, just the sound of the starter motor turning over, it brings back all those memories.
Superb.
And it's always a thrill.
Tell us about that final lap, because we showed the footage actually on Friday at Haythorpe Park as part of the Jaguar Summer Festival's talk on Friday evening, and I was sat there and the goosebumps were coming up and my hairs were standing on end just watching it. When you were sat in the car in that final lap and all the marshals are waving their flags, what's running through your mind? Are you allowed to let yourself go, yes, we've done it, or is it till the very end you didn't celebrate?
Well, I mean, I think if you're in the car, of course Jan was in the car at the end on this particular occasion, but if you're in the car at the end, you mustn't lose your focus and concentration, because that's when something can go wrong. But for us, we were in the pit lane, we knew something was up, we weren't quite sure how bad the gearbox was. You're just watching the monitor, and there's absolutely nothing you can do at this point. But we did have the best pair of hands available in Jan in the car. I mean, if anybody could get that car to the end, it was going to be him.
Well, it's such a privilege to have you here with us at Blenheim Palace, Andy Wallace, and I know lots of people will be wanting to come and get autographs from you and talk about those amazing achievements of TWR and Jaguar. A final word on Tom Walkinshaw, sadly no longer with us, a great man in motorsport, a great legacy that he's left behind. What was he like to drive for as a team boss?
Well, first of all, he gave me a big break. My career was pretty much going nowhere after Formula 3 because I didn't have the money to make the next step up. He gave me a chance. He was somebody that you had to do 100% of your ability every time you sat in the car, and he wanted you to work hard and he wanted you to concentrate, and if you did that, he was great. I think if you stepped out of line, you'd have found out straight away. But I mean, isn't that how you're successful? You have to be tough and you have to know what you want, and you did.